NFL Week 13 is here. We have a week of some early games as well. And Tom, absolutely no bye weeks, which is always good news. But we've got Thanksgiving games on Thursday. We've got Packers v Lions, Chiefs v Cowboys, Bengals versus Ravens. Sorry, the mighty Ravens. And then Black Friday football, Bears versus Eagles. So get those waiver claims in now if you need to get your kicks and defense in, especially. And do not forget to set those lineups early, especially, Tom, if you have some of the players I've got up on the screen. So, first up, starts of the week, I have Bo Nix versus the Washington Commanders. He's had a low couple of weeks before the bye week, and at the time of recording, he's only plugged into 12% of lineups, but expect that to rise with a very QB-friendly matchup against the Commanders, giving up the fourth most fantasy points per game to fantasy quarterbacks, 19.92. Where do you sit on season 2 of Bo Nix?
I think he's an interesting one, isn't he? I don't think he'll be one of those truly elite quarterbacks, but I think he's certainly serviceable. I figure over kind of the course of his career, he'll maybe even out a sort of either very sort of low end QB1 or high end QB2. I don't see him sort of cracking that top 5, top 6 long term, but. He's been decent, hasn't he? I mean, if you've taken him, he went quite late in rookie drafts, didn't he? So if you've got him in dynasty, something like that, you've had fantastic value out of him. But I just don't see him as a sort of world beater.
I think where he was going in redraft in the offseason is not quite repaid that. A player that, if you do have, though, has paid it back over the last few weeks and then some. Jacoby Brissett has the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. They're giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the season, 90.35, but the most over the last 4 weeks. Over the last 4 weeks, they've averaged 27.90 fantasy points. Now, Jacoby Brissett still only 50% rostered, and I don't know why, Tom. 6 weeks he's played, 6 top 12 weeks. This will be week 7. Even if you don't feel QB needy this week, I would just have a look at who you've got plugged in, what matchup they've got, and if Brissett is available in your league, because I think he probably has got a way to a top 8, cautiously top 6 potentially. He's going to outperform most quarterbacks this week in this matchup, I feel. So I would definitely be starting him this week and copy and paste for Michael Wilson. Tampa Bay are also giving up over the last 4 weeks the most points to wide receivers, 44.50. If Jacoby Brissett's going to have a good game, it looks like Michael Wilson will have a good game because he's been that reliable target for Brissett. Tampa have been shipping points to wide receivers. Wilson is in form. Spoiler alert, here is my DFS stack of the week sat right here as well. Gives me great value for what they turn out. Michael Wilson's a player we've spoken about a lot over the last couple of years and hoped to see a bit more of him last year. It turns out, not too surprisingly, it may be the same for Marvin Harrison Jr. He's get backs as well. All the receiver in Arizona needed was not Kyler Murray. Is that a bit mean?
No, I think this could signal the end of Murray, really, to be honest. I think they'll start to look up. There's been rumbling of it, haven't there, for the last sort of few seasons. And you don't really get it. I mean, when he came out, he was decent. I know he's sort of obviously slightly undersized for the position, but he had that kind of running floor. But he's just not consistent enough. Unfortunately, I've got him in one of our sort of bigger leagues, so I've got to look for a replacement QB. But I have got Jacoby Brissett to start this week. But next season, I'll need some trades probably.
I'm sure we will be talking a lot more about Kyler Murray in the offseason. For me, character comes into it as well, but that is for another show. Next up, Woody Marks has the Indianapolis Colts, giving it the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks. He's had a dip over the last couple of weeks, but the carries and the workload have still been there. Over the season, the Colts haven't been too bad against running backs, but said recently they have struggled a little bit more. I think he's a plug-in for a reasonably safe flex score this week. Now, John Mechie, what a revelation over the last couple of games. He's got the Falcons this week, 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. Saw 7 targets last week, and Tyrod Taylor definitely elevates the Jets passing game. With the Falcons being such a soft matchup, expect that run to continue, I think, again for Mechie this week. Finally, I took a victory lap in our review show. Gunnar Helm was one of my tight end starts of the week. He finished the week as tight end 13, a decent return for a player who at the time was 2% rostered. This week, he gets to kind of go straight again because he's got the Jacksonville Jaguars, second most fantasy points per game to tight ends over the last 4 weeks. He's shown himself to be a bit of a preferred target for Bryce Young, especially since the bye. The Jags are unlikely to do anything to slow that connection down. So I think this week we have a tight end 8 to 12 finish on the table. Any of those you think you'll be plugging in? Any of those you massively disagree with, Tom?
I mean, Marks I've got in a few places, but actually he tends to be set on taxi squads for me on dynasty leagues. Gunnar Helm, I think it's an interesting one. Is Brenton Strange their other tight end? Am I right in thinking that?
Brenton Strange at the Jags.
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's at the Jags, isn't he?
Yeah, Titans got Chig as well, haven't they?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Chig, he's been quite disappointing, hasn't he? He was supposed to be decent this year, wasn't he? But has sort of dropped off. Mechie, I suppose, as you say, is the most interesting one. Can he sustain that form? Probably this week because he's got the Falcons. But I'd be interested to see how he does it long term. He never really got a chance before being traded, but he's obviously shown he can do the business. But this week certainly a decent plug-in, but I'd worry about relying on him for the rest of the sort of fantasy playoffs and that kind of season.
Before we move on to our sits, then please do take a moment to subscribe, to like, to give us a share. Join us for our shows all the way through the season. Start sits, heroes, zeros, DFS, and streaming picks as well. Players to be sitting this week, then. Once again, we ignore the name profile. We look purely at the data because it tends to work out more often than it does not. I'm starting with where there are a bit of data point that confuses me. That's Johnny Smith and Pat Fryermuth. So they've got the Bills. Every week, my start point for sits is have a look which tight ends are playing the Bills and making sure we sit them because they are absolutely. So I think they've only had one red zone target to tight ends over the course of so far, and they're giving something like 2.5 receptions per game to tight ends. So when you've got a job share, that's going to be a concern anyway. Johnny Smith's only had one top 12 week, yet is still started at the time of recording in 13% of leagues. Makes no sense to me. Pat Fryermuth has 3 top 12 weeks, yet he started in fewer leagues, 4%. That is still 4% too many. This week, that should absolutely be 0% for both of them everywhere. Speaking of data points, the only data point that suggests we should be starting Cooper Kupp at any point this season is that his name is Cooper Kupp. There is nothing else to justify starting him. For me, he's droppable. I have dropped him in a couple of places this week because, yeah, he might have an all right game, but it just doesn't seem it's going to happen. 56% rostered is far too high. 23% started last weekend is ridiculous unless your redraft roster is in absolute dire state. The Vikings are very solid against wide receivers, the fewest fantasy points per game to them over the course of this season. JSN plugged in regardless. He is that level of elite this season. He is still going to do you a job. Maybe not the job we've seen over the last few weeks, but a job will definitely be done. Cooper Kupp should be nowhere near your roster. Is this the end of Cooper Kupp and any fancy relevance, Tom?
Yes, quite simply. Sadly, obviously he's been an absolute legend of the game. But, like all of us, time does begin to catch up with you. And he's just not done it at all this year. Was it last year you had the bet on him being a wide receiver 1? Was that last year? I can't remember. Last season?
I don't know. I think whenever I went for it, it was a season too late. So last year feels about right.
Yeah. But certainly, no hope of anything like that this year. So sadly, yes, I would totally agree. It is the end of Cooper Kupp.
Michael Pittman this week gets the Texans, who are looking really good on defense at the moment. 4th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the course of the season. Pittman's been top 24 in 8 games. I think that's a pretty good return for where you were drafting him in the offseason. But the other 3 games were absolute stinkers with fewer than 5 points. This matchup, I think, lands in the stinker category, unfortunately. So I'll be benching Pittman this week. Brock Purdy, a gross game last week. QB 20, 10.32 points. He follows up with the Browns. As much as I love to say negative things about the Cleveland Browns, third fewest fantasy points per game over the course of the season so far to quarterbacks, 13.03. Over the last 4 games, that has dropped to 8.63. Is currently starting in 49% of leagues at the moment. He will still be starting players if people might have any choice, but I see that dropping to about 20% by Sunday. Tyrone Tracy gets the Patriots, who've given up the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. He stepped straight in Scatterboo's absence. I think Scatterboo stepped straight in for Tracy. Tracy stepped straight back in for Scatterboo. This week, I think he takes that step back, though, because of how good the Patriots defense has been against fantasy running backs. And finally, Tom, a player that was a start of the week several times at the beginning of the season and then became an obvious no-brainer plug-in. Rico Dowdle this week has the Rams, who are once again really solid on defense against running backs, third fewest fantasy points per game, have only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns all season. I accept there is a good chance that with other things you have available, Rico Dowdle will still be starting for you. But also, considering he was picked up from waivers for the vast majority of people, you may have a bit of room for maneuver. And I'd at least be thinking about that with Dowdle this week. Any on there you are starting regardless, or any there you have no choice but to start this week?
I think I would go with Michael Pittman. I've liked Pittman this year. I think he's done well across the season. He seems to be the preferred target, really, for Danny Dimes. And Purdy, I think I've got in one league that I've just got to start, though I might have a quick look at the waiver wire and see if Tyrod or Jacoby Brissett's on there. Dowd and Tracy, interesting. If you had to start one of the two, which one would you start? Because that's quite, potentially a question some people might have to answer.
Yeah. I think that is a tricky one. I think I trust I trust the Giants maybe for a bit. I'd go Trace. I wouldn't want to make that decision at all. But yeah, I'd maybe go Tracy.
Fair enough.
Right, let's move on then, Tom, to your game of the week, which is turning to Thanksgiving Thursday. We have Packers versus Lions. Tell us about how the Lions are going to destroy the Green Bay Packers.
So how could I resist, obviously, a chance to talk about the Packers? It's the first of the Thanksgiving Day games. So delight for us UK viewers. We get to watch from 6 o'clock. I always love Thanksgiving week because obviously you've got the Thursday games, then the Friday game. I guess it makes Red Zone slightly more disappointing because you've not got quite as many games on the slate. But it is always a treat for us to get so many games we can watch at easy, accessible times. This week, as we say, the Packers versus the Lions. It's an NFC classic. Overall, Packers lead 108 wins to Detroit, 78. They've drawn 7 times. Sadly this week, I actually agree that I think the Lions might just about edge it at Ford Field, which should make the NFC North title race even more exciting. However, obviously the Lions do seem to have this habit of winning, losing. So maybe we'll get lucky. So obviously let's look at some of those locked-in players. First of all, for Green Bay, maybe some debate on this one, but for me, Jordan Love is a lock-in here. He had a poor showing last week, but he'll look to bounce back against the Lions. He scored just 7 points against the Vikings. A real mixed year from him. He's sitting just outside that QB1 conversation at QB14 on the season. Detroit sit in the middle of the pack against the pass, currently at 15th. I would start him, but obviously maybe that's slightly my Packers bias there. Potentially you've got other options on your bench. A must start if he's fit is obviously Josh Jacobs. He's currently running back 7 on the season. He's been good value for those who got him sort of late second rounds in drafts. He's only missed the 1 game so far. He's averaging 18.5 points per game in PPR formats. He is, however, currently listed as questionable. And obviously it's a short week, so it's important that we keep our eye on that. Moving over to Detroit's must starts. Obviously we've got to start with Jahmyr Gibbs after last week. Currently ranked as the RB3 on the season. That monster score, 55.4 points. It would be foolish not to start him against the Packers defense that has struggled so much against the run this year. I actually predict him to be the real difference maker and sadly, give me a disappointing start to Thanksgiving. And then alongside him in the wide receiver position, obviously I'm going with Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's continued to show that dominance in that short to sort of mid-range. He's taking those mid-range passes off Goff, going on to turn those into big plays. He currently sits as a wide receiver 3 on the season, averaging 19.85 points. He's only had 2 showings all year, scoring less than 10 points. He's a lock in most teams, which is confirmed on Sleeper. He's starting 99% of leagues. And then finally, Jared Goff, again, another quarterback who's had kind of an up and down season so far. He currently sits as a QB 11 on the season, averaging 17.81 points per game. As you said, he's also been quite up and down, very much like Jordan Love, but he's generally played well. And, he appears to come through that purple patch. Kind of weeks 3 through 7, he was really, really struggling, but he seems to be sort of on the up from that now. I think you could do a lot worse at QB, particularly if you haven't got one of those elite top options. I think either Love or Goff would do you a decent job. Players that could or should hopefully pay off. I mean, the Packers offense is totally wide receiver focused now with the loss of Tucker Kraft to injury. It's led to a slightly narrower target tree, although it's still quite difficult to guess who Love is going to favour on each week. Christian Watson, for me, continues to show the talent when healthy, and he's got that big playability. I think he's the most dominant of all the Packers wide receivers. He's currently averaging at 11.46 points per game, so he should be a fairly safe bet. And then the other man that could or should pay off is obviously the star of the show last week, Emmanuel Wilson. He was excellent, as a fill-in. And if Jacobs is out, which he could potentially be, again, we need to check that close to the start time. I would certainly plug him in and play. He came in for Jacobs after he was injured in week 11 versus the Giants and put in a respectable 13.9 point score. And then last week, he really showed actually he can lead a backfield, scoring 26.5 points versus the Vikings. As I say, they've got that real short turnaround. Jacobs listed as limited. He could really be worth a punt. Potentially, will we long-term move to that 1A, 1B situation, which in the past LaFleur's favoured? Time will tell on that. I mean, it's quite a difficult. I just can't see it happening. For me, Jacobs has been so dominant and so good since he's come in. But I don't know. What do you think on that? Obviously, Wilson had such a great showing last week.
I think, Jacobs is the clear. I think it would be more likely to be a 1-2 than a 1A, 1B.
Yeah.
But Wilson is shown that he can do the role. It's got to take a little bit of work because it just saves a little bit of wear for Jacobs. We always see how many injuries running backs get. I think it's so many more teams now. You see I think gone are the days of even just a handful of years ago, the same running back taking all the snaps, doing all the work. That committee, or at least supporting back, is more. And Emmanuel, he looks absolutely fit for that role, and maybe just makes Jacobs even more efficient. Maybe if he's not having to be out there every single play. I don't know. You're right. Time will tell, but it's definitely one to be interesting, especially come draft season next year, whether it impacts their stock for either of them.
It likely to become a fantasy gremlin, then that's what we're saying.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, more problems.
More problems. Even more difficult picking who to play for the Packers. So over to Detroit. Obviously, if we've got our could or should pay off, we have to mention Jameson Williams. He continues to fluctuate. It could be due a big week this week. He is the true definition of a boom or bust player, finishing outside of the top 50 wide receivers 4 games, but as a wide receiver 1, also 4 games. Last week, he scored a particularly disappointing 0, which I know was talked about on the show, which is even more upsetting, as he was looking to gain momentum, having those 3 plus 15 points games. Time will tell with him, as always. Plug him in potentially. It's a bit of a risk. Best of luck-wise, players we probably shouldn't be starting. Packers-wise, Romeo Doubs, he's been disappointing lately. Showed some quite early promise in the first few games of the season, gaining kind of steady 10 points. He's still averaging 10.84 points, but remember he had that huge 29.8 week 4 against the Cowboys, which has clearly boosted that score. I would totally avoid Matthew Golden. The first-round rookie continues to underwhelm. Same as Savion Williams, and Musgrave, unfortunately, although I was hoping he would step in and fill in Kraft's shoes, just hasn't done the business. Detroit, again, another man you guys mentioned on the other show. David Montgomery has to be considered a bust this year. With week 3 versus Ravens and week 5 against the Bengals, his only impressive scores this season. I mean, could this be the week he upsets the third member of TH Fantasy?
Maybe.
I doubt it. With him locking 5 or 6 touches in his last 2 games, I would certainly shy away from starting him unless necessary. So that's where we are with the game. Your feelings on any of those?
No, I think, you know how I feel about Packers wide receivers. They're just a constant frustration, disappointment. It's nice, though, because it is useful when the Packers draft a wide receiver. You know you don't need to draft them for your fantasy team. Makes that quite straightforward, I guess. And Monty, from a draft capital fantasy point of view, has to be considered a bust. But from a real life point of view, last season was a shocker that he was as good as he was. This is perhaps just that natural decline. And he will now settle into that supporting role rather than the full-on double act with the Lions. I can never hear a bad word said about Monty. So he has been a bust, but I still adore him. So I cannot say anything too negative. Right then, we're going to move on now to our favourite part of the show. And once again, Eddie's not here, so you're going to step up and hopefully get him a win.
Fantasy Fox, Preston versus Ed.
So I've crossed that out. Ed was not here to record this evening after an unfortunate trouser-related mishap. So Tom is plugging in instead. It's 6-5 at the minute, Tom, and I am going this week for what I'm billing as the Thanksgiving Showdown. But hang on, I've got a festive board. Let's throw that up as well. It's a simple one. I was looking at what I could possibly do for our Thanksgiving Showdown, looking at all of the games that are happening on Thursday and then also for Black Friday. And there's only one way to go. Packers are playing, Ravens are playing. Let's go. Packers versus Ravens. We will take the highest score at QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end. We will then have a flex spot. So whoever the next highest scoring running back, wide receiver, or tight end is, kicker and defense, total score wins. However, the decision rests with you, Tom. Are you going to choose your Green Bay Packers, or will you choose the mighty Ravens, who are going to destroy the Cincinnati Bengals?
I mean, first of all, hats off to your Adobe skills. That is an excellent festive board before we go into anything. I think it's a pretty good prop bet. There's a lot of pressure on. I don't really want to let Ed down. I'm hoping to tie up the score for him. But actually, it's a lot closer than you look at it, think about it. The Packers have a tougher game. I know the Bengals will start to find a little bit of form. But you've got to say, they're the easier of the two opponents. Lamar Jackson worries me. He's due a massive week. He's been so bad the last few weeks. I've got him in loads of leagues, and he's just been so awful. Wide receiver wise, I mean, really for you guys, it's only Zay Flowers. There's no other man there. Mark Andrews, another man I've got an awful lot of shares of, has been a huge disappointment this year. Running back, obviously you've got Henry, haven't you? I think for me. Yeah, he is a whole lot of beef. I think for me this week, I think I'm going to have to be a bit of a traitor, and I'm going to have to go with, having just slated them, the Ravens. I think you've got that easier matchup. I think Lamar's got to be due a big week, surely. He's got to score me like 40 points this week and boost that. The Packers have a much more difficult, game. Love, although Love will give you an average score, but I don't think he's not capable of scoring what Lamar can score. If Jacobs was fully fit, maybe I would have lent more towards the Packers. A wide receiver wide, it's just so difficult to pick. I know Tucker Kraft again makes it a hard choice. Defense could be a big difference. So yeah, I'm going to be a bit of a traitor, and I'm going to go with the Ravens this week and take them away from you.
Main reason I chose this, so I thought your loyalty would stay to the Packers and I'd have an easy win, because I would also obviously go for it. So looking up now, it's the Bengals factor for me, that they looked a bit better on defense last week. Joe Flacco didn't look as good as well. One of the most inexplicable interceptions I've ever watched him throw the ball for that interception. You could see it was an interception before he let go of it. I think it's in our group chat. It's like one of those that you do on Madden. You're thinking, I need to press the button. But the Bengals over the course of the season, third most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. the most fancy points per game to running backs, the 10th most fancy points per game to wide receivers, the most to tight ends, the 5th most to kickers, and the 6th most to defenses. So, yeah, you've made the complete logical situation. My one worry is the Ravens offense has been sluggish over the last couple of weeks, and the Bengals defense looked to be waking up a little bit. And it's a divisional game. Who knows which way it goes? But yeah, I think you've got the win. I think this could bring it back to 6-all for Ed, and he will be feeling very happy once more. That is all from us, though, for our Week 13 preview. So we are recording on Friday. So tomorrow, or whenever you're watching it on Thursday, enjoy those Thanksgiving games. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our viewers in America. Happy bonus NFL evening of a midweek for our UK viewers. We'll be back on Friday for our streaming show and some DFS picks as well. Anything you want to add about Week 13, Tom, or have we said all of the things?
I don't think there's anything else at all to add.
Well, as always then, bada bing, bada bye. Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.